Welcome for something a little bit different today. Call it a short break from the blade reviews. But recently Matt Rose, and if you haven't checked out his channel, definitely do so. He recently reviewed the Cold Steel Marauder. And the one thing he didn't like about it was the sub-hilt. And his reasoning for that is he only uses his knives as field utility tools, not martial tools, so it was in his way. Now, I've covered the topic of the sub-hilt and its functions in reviews I've done on sub-hilt knives, but I've also been promising a dedicated video on the subject, so I figured this is a good reason to get to it. So I'm going to start by taking a selection of my sub-hilt knives and run them through a selection of my usual utility tests to see if the sub-hilt helps, hinders, or if it's a non-issue. And then we'll talk about the different martial uses of the sub-hilt. And I devised a few tests, and let's just say the results kind of surprised me. For today's testing, I chose 4 sample sub-hilts from my collection. My personal martial favorite, the Cold Steel Black Bear Classic. The Marauder, of course. The OSI. Now, I did not include the OSS because its blade is very similar to the Black Bear on the same grip as the OSI and the Marauder, so I figured I'd go with the blade that had a different geometry, weight, and balance, and a gill Hibben. Before we get into the tests and the further discussion, I did want to address one criticism that a lot of people have about these Cold Steel solid Craton sub-hilts. It's the same grip you're going to find on the OSS, OSI Marauder, and the sadly discontinued Boar Hunter. A lot of people feel that these are really cheap looking and sad and flimsy because they're flexible as compared to a proper steel or other metal guard and sub-hilt. And I used to believe that myself. This is certainly a lot prettier, but when it comes to practical functionality, well, one thing I've learned from all of my Craton grips is this material is very grippy and very shock absorbing, and that is also true in this case of the guard and the sub-hilt. Now, for knives with guards this big, they're not swords, they're not parrying daggers, they don't have the big sweeping S-curves of Bowie knives or knuckle bows or anything like that. How much is a guard this size really going to protect your hand from an incoming blade, as compared to its main job, keeping your hand from sliding up onto the blade in stabbing and thrusting? And I'm going to say that this setup is perfectly adequate for that, and actually better at it because it is shock absorbing and flexible. This is going to be something you're going to see in the tests, that under impact, the sharp corners of a metal sub-hilt are not very kind to the index finger, whereas these are perfectly comfortable. And the other benefit is, if you don't like them, you can just cut them off. For the utility tests, I left out the Black Bear Classic. By design, I feel like that is really not suited to be a utility knife. For fine carving, I only used the OSI and the Hibben because I felt like the Marauder was just too big and chunky for fine work. And when it came to the OSI, well, first off, I was really impressed with how well this blade did. I haven't had it out in a while.
Well, again, with this one, I really don't even feel like I'm pressing with it. It's just sort of there between my fingers. It's not in the way. Well, obviously it's not going to do anything that way. But it's not in the way.
But yeah, it's really slicey at that job. And as for the sub-hilt, I don't feel like it helped, hindered, made any difference whatsoever. It wasn't in the way, but neither did it assist me with the task. The Hibben, however, okay, well...
Yeah, that is... just unpleasant. Let me see if I go this way. I don't feel it so much anymore. It's just kind of there.
I mentioned how I struggle with hollow ground blades, and this one is a really deep hollow grind. Doesn't have the best edge on it. Yes, I could probably improve it. So it wasn't a great carving tool to begin with, but yeah, this grip, of all my sub-hilts, this one is the most restrictive in terms of not only the smallest space in here to shift my grip around, but it's the most enclosed and has corners in like all the worst places. I've done a lot of work dehorning it, but yeah, still it's very awkward and uncomfortable. Sorry, Gil. So yeah, no fun at all to use in the fine carving test. Moving up to carving feathers into a split fur log, I used all 3 knives.
Can't really say I'm using it. It's just there. And the Cray X is comfortable. Smaller knife is handier for carving in general. Not that this is a bad knife at all, it's actually a very good knife. Well, my index finger is running more into the guard than anything else here. And I'm also dealing with a hollow grind that's not really good.
And yeah, again, the OSI, very slicey. I felt like I had a really good grip on it, but I can't really say that was the sub-hilt more than the Cray X. And I had a pretty similar result with the Marauder. Even though it is a bigger and chunkier blade, still very useful at that task. But then the Hibben, yeah, awkward to hold on to and put leverage into, and the edge wasn't great in that task either, so... Alright, so... One of the tests you see a lot on my channel is making straight thin branches into plant stakes for our gardening projects. And the 2 ways I do that, one is kind of like sharpening a pencil with some fine carving.
So for pencil sharpening, it's not really doing anything here. It's barely notice it. Fine carving. Okay, yeah, I've got the same problem where I am feeling a massive hot spot on my knuckle that makes me pull my index finger just out of it.
And in that task, the OSI and the Marauder were just fine. Got to put some credit to the grips as well. I don't think, again, that the sub-hilts were making any real difference in terms of helping, but neither were they in my way. But the Hibben, yeah, not a great slicer, and just, it's awkward. Awkward. I'm going to keep saying that. Awkward and uncomfortable. Which then gets to the other way I might make steaks, if I'm in more of a hurry, is with some fine chopping, chiseling away at that tip.
Out for the fine little snap cutting. I don't really have my index finger in it. Again, it's there, but it's neither doing anything nor in my way. Fine chopping. Again, with the grip I'm using, I'm really not even noticing it's there. Might be helping a little bit. My finger is pushing on it slightly.
In that case, I'm going to say they all actually did equally well, but the sub-hilt, again, didn't really come into play with movements like that. Finally, chopping into a log. A lot of this was not the performance of the blade, but I was testing, okay, impact back into my hand.
Yeah, okay, I can feel the retention, a little bit of snap that I'm getting out of this, yeah. All right, now it's coming into play. So I'm basically snap cutting with it. Well, I think we've already determined this is not a good knife for chopping.
OSI was just fine. Actually, impressed me more than I thought it would, because this is a really light blade, doesn't have a lot of mass behind it. Speaking of mass, though, yeah, I certainly got much better chop out of the Marauder, but trying to do it with the Hibben, not only was it really uncomfortable in terms of the shock back into my hand, especially around those corners, I still haven't managed to dehorn enough. But for whatever reason, it was bouncing off the log. There will, however, be a little bit of redemption coming up. All right, let's start our discussion of the martial function of the sub-hilt with the 4 things that the sub-hilt supposedly does for you, and most people's main problem with them. And I'm going to start with, it's like fingering the guard of a sword. It puts the knife more in line with your arm for thrusting and gives you better tip control. And I'm going to say, in my experience, that's not really significant. I mean, it's a knife, not a rapier. I have demonstrated in some of my knife reviews reasons why I might finger the guard of my knife. But alignment isn't my main reason for doing that. And when it comes to aligning the weapon with my arm for thrusting, I can use any of a number of extended forward grips, whether that's a handshake grip or a saber grip or a foil grip, that don't involve me fingering a guard or a sub-hilt. And if we're being honest, consider why people started fingering the guards of their swords back in the day. It was to move their hand further up the weapon, closer to the point of balance, to make the blade feel lighter and therefore be more nimble in hand. And yes, it did align your sword with the arm for thrusting, but it also might get in the way of other uses of the sword. It depends on what your sword is designed to do primarily. Is it a thruster, is it a cutter, or is it a cut and thrust sword? But when we're talking about a knife, I just haven't found that to be a significant reason to justify the sub-hilt. Second potential use of the sub-hilt, improved hand retention to keep the weapon from being dislodged from your grip. And I'm going to say I definitely notice it, but mostly in one grip. And we will talk about a variety of grips, including reverse grip, here in a few minutes. But I have to admit, I feel a lot more hand retention in the Cray X grips. And part of that is that the Cray X would be very grippy for me even without the sub-hilt. We'll talk about one benefit of the Cray X sub-hilt. I do feel it with the metal ones, but it is primarily in a good, solid, full-fisted hammer grip where I can really clamp down with my index finger. Any grip that's more open or extended than that, I'm losing all of it. This is also where that Cray X sub-hilt is actually really nice, because if I'm putting a lot of pressure on that, it's not uncomfortable. Whereas the metal one might have some sharp corners in bad places. I had to do a lot of dehorning with that Hibben because it has sharp corners in all the wrong places. Sorry, Gil. But you do have to consider in general, well, the materials and the texture and the design of your grip when it comes to hand retention. If I'm getting that hand retention basically out of having something I can really clamp my index finger into, would I not get similar function out of a grip that just has a big old index finger groove in it? And the answer is, well, yeah. Potential function 3, and the reason I would finger the guard of a knife most often is to give me leverage to pull the blade out of some sort of media it might be stuck in. And for that, the sub-hilt is excellent. And that is something I test every time I go to pull the thing out of its sheath. Before we get to the fourth and arguably most important function of the sub-hilt, I want to talk about why there is an argument, a question. What are sub-hilts good for? Not good for? Are they good for anything at all? And that's because that even today there's surprisingly little information out there about them. It's one of the reasons I'm making the video, is at least add my own experience. What I like and maybe not so much like about them from my years of using them. But when I was first exposed to the sub-hilt design, it was even worse. We're talking 1980, custom knife shop in Tucson, Arizona. In the display case, they had a selection of gorgeous, handmade, loveless works of art that were way beyond the budget of a college student living off peanut butter sandwiches and ramen. But that design stuck with me, and maybe you could call that the fifth function of the sub-hilt, is they just look so damn cool, so sexy. But is that all it is? Now, back in 1980, I did have conversations with the people who worked in that shop, and they were very knowledgeable and very experienced, and even they had different opinions on what the sub-hilt was good for and not good for. But among martial users, I feel like most of them would agree that the thing it does best is assisting in the snap cut, what is often referred to as a trigger action, where you use your index finger pulling against the sub-hilt at the focus of the snap cut to give it just that much more, well, snap. And as I've trained with these, yes, I feel it, but I've never actually put it to practical testing until now. To martial test the snap cut, I had to put some thought behind it. And I've been thinking about making this video for a while, and one of the things I thought about was just getting another one of these cracked sub-hilts and just cutting the sub-hilt off and see what the difference was, but I've never bothered to set aside the money to do that. So I figured my next best bet would be to, well, consciously try to use the sub-hilt, the trigger action, and then, well, void my index finger and just use the rocking of my hand to do the snap cut, so the sub-hilt wouldn't come into play at all. And you might consider that a little bit too extreme because, you know, aren't you using your index finger at least a little bit in snap cutting? I guess it depends on how you do it. But the first test was on some triple thick cardboard. And that's where things started to, well, go as expected and not.
Using the sub-hilt. Not to use the sub-hilt. Using the finger. Not using the finger. With the sub-hilt. Without the sub-hilt. With the sub-hilt. Without the sub-hilt. Snap cut using the sub-hilt. Snap cut trying not to use the sub-hilt. First with the sub-hilt, and then without. With, without.
As expected, with all knives, I seem to get better penetration into the material when I was using the sub-hilt versus not using the sub-hilt. Some of it, though, was dependent on exactly how I hit the cardboard, because I was having one of the problems you tend to have when you cut cardboard is sometimes one of those surface sheets will pull and curl and actually block your blade. So that sometimes threw off the test. Also, I was struggling, I think, a little bit with my own honesty in terms of the impetus, the consistency of the cut, so that might have affected the game a little bit. So I repeated it over and over and over again, and generally found I was getting a couple of inches deeper penetration in the cut. Now, I'm not cutting really hard. I'm really just using the momentum of the snap to see what that would do. So that kind of gave me a result that was expected. But then, okay, wanted to try something different with the Black Bear, because in talking about other grips, I can grip this thing with the edge facing towards me, because if I'm gripping it with the edge facing away from me, I'm going to contort myself so you can see it, the web of my hand is below the subhilt. So if I reverse this around and just sunk the subhilt into the web of my hand in a handshake grip is fundamentally in the same position. So I figured, wouldn't that be a great way to test how it would work without the subhilt? And
with the subhilt, back edge, of course, without. Without.
This did a whole lot better than the other grips did. And I think some of that came from just, well, the different bias in the shape of the grip, how it's kind of curved into this snap cut. So that was an unexpected result. The next test was about an inch and a half apple branch. A really hard wood, to see what would happen with your snap cut hitting something, well, kind of hardwood-like, shall we say, without getting demonetized.
Cut, sub-hilt, without. OSI with the sub-hilt, without. Snap cut with the sub-hilt. Snap cut without. Snap cut with. Snap cut without.
And that's where things went a little bit weird. I tested a couple of different branches from a couple of different angles.
Hilt. Snap cut without. With the sub-hilt. Snap cut without. The sub-hilt. Snap cut without. Cut with. Snap cut without.
And the Hibben actually bit better without the use of the subhilt. The others performed cut into that media equally well with or without. I wasn't expecting that. But then when I repeated the test with a slightly thicker branch, it started to become clear I was getting, for whatever reason, a harder hit and more bite when I wasn't using the subhilt as compared to when I was. And it's just a little bit of difference, but it was noticeable. And I realized what was happening is having my index finger in the subhilt kind of restricted the forward momentum a little bit. In other words, in the snap, I was kind of pulling back on myself a little bit, pulling my cut, as it were. Whereas if I pulled my finger out of the way and was using the rest of my hand in the snap cut, I was throwing the blade just a lot more freely, and that was creating a bigger cut into the media, a harder hit. That was really unexpected. So I went up to a very messy, sticky, sappy fir branch.
Without. With. Without. With. Without. With the sub-hilt. Without the sub-hilt. With the sub-hilt. without. With the sub hilt. And without. With the sub hilts. That's getting some nice bite. Without.
And that was a material that I figured, okay, be softer than the hard, dry apple wood. And I did get better bite into it. Again, I'm not hitting really hard. I'm just using the snap, the momentum of the knife to see what that would do. And in more cases than not, I was either getting equal results, sub-hilt, no sub-hilt, or it was doing better when I was not using the sub-hilt. Again, that feeling that I was just throwing the knife a lot more freely if my index finger was entirely out of the conversation. So what did I learn from this? Well, maybe the sub-hilt isn't that big a help in the snap cut, or at least not the way I snap cut. It depends on how you snap cut, whether it's going to be a benefit to you or not. But one thing that was definitely noticeable in the test is anytime there was impact involved, I definitely felt the corners of the metal one, whereas the Cray X was, well, doing what it does best, eating up shock. Also, the Cray X in all of the tests just felt a whole lot better, more secure in my hand than the grips that are made out of a slicker material. So prettier functionally isn't always better. But let's go ahead and talk about, well, most people's major concern with the sub-hilt is that it gets in the way of you using other grips. Well, then basically a forward grip with the blade facing away from you. Let's start with the alternate forward grips. Obviously, the sub-hilt works just fine in a handshake or a hammer grip with the edge facing away from you. If I turn the blade sideways in a foil grip, as long as the edge is facing inside, well, the sub-hilt is completely out of my way. I don't really notice it at all. But if I rotate the blade towards me, which gives me more natural cutting action in the arc of a stab, or if you have a sharpened recurve clip, we saw how effective the Black Bear was in the panel test cut, unexpectedly so. Yeah, you can get some really good bite out of that in a snap cut. As I already demonstrated, if I'm in a handshake grip, the web of my hand is sitting below where the sub-hilt is anyway. So when I rotate it around, the sub-hilt is basically just wedged into the web of my hand. Now with the Cray X, well, it's not only grippy, so my hand's not slipping under impact, but with that flexible sub-hilt, I'm not getting, well, any hot spots in collision, whereas with some of the metal ones, if they have sharp corners in the wrong place, like this one, sorry, Gil, that could be uncomfortable to stab with. The other thing that's uncomfortable until you get used to it is the fact that a lot of these grips are biased in one direction with these sort of horsehoof shaped butt ends. But I've kind of found I can make them hug the curvatures of, well, the heel of my thumb right there. So I can make that work for me. Now if I'm going for more of a full-fisted hammer grip for a stab, what that's doing is just making the grip feel kind of short, and I'm also feeling the curvature of the grip going the wrong way a little bit more. Before we talk about using the sub-hilt in a reverse grip, we have to get there, and I'm going to give you the same advice I always do. Never transition your grip when you are within reach of your opponent, and always consider what fine motor coordination has been blown away by adrenaline in a real or even realistic sparring situation. If you fumble a live blade, that's going to be really bad. So work with the knife in whatever grip it's in. But depending on how you deployed your knife, drew it from the sheath, it might come out in a reverse grip and you need to be able to work with a sub-hilt in a reverse grip. Now, I've also recommended that if you have two hands free and you're going to transition your knife, give yourself a lot of distance, time and calm, use two hands, safest option. If you're going to train a one-handed transition, yes, I do find myself finger twirling with these, and no, the sub-hilt doesn't get in my way of doing that, but I don't recommend it. It is my old bad reflexive habit. I'm often not aware that I'm doing it until I've already done it. It is easy to fumble, and again, fumbling a live blade is always a bad thing, so just don't. If you're going to do a one-handed transition, use the pinch flip, and in many cases, these butt ends are flared to give you a good place to index. Sub-hilt isn't really in your way. Now, what happens differently with a sub-hilt is how your hand settles back onto the knife. Sometimes what's happening with me is my grip is just simply getting a hold of the knife entirely below the sub-hilt. And there's usually enough grip on there that that's not a problem. Or there's going to be a fraction of a second of fumbling for me to get my pinky into the sub-hilt. And once it's locked in, yeah, I'm feeling that retention function. Absolutely. But if I've got a metal sub-hilt with sharp corners, I'm also buying myself the potential that it's going to bite me under impact. The Cray X in this is definitely superior because not only is it grippier than a smooth grip, my hand is going to stay put, but yeah, that sub-hilt is going to give, it's not going to bite me. What about rotating the edge towards me? Well, in North American Bowie, what they'll often do is use the S guard by pressing the guard into the heel of the hand, kind of locking it in. Now, it does take the blade a little bit out of line with your arm, but by clamping down on it, you get a lot of retention. Actually also prevents the knife from twisting in your hand. Once you get used to it, it feels really, really secure. With the sub-hilt, I'm actually getting a little bit more of that by locking that sub-hilt right into the center of the hollow of my hand. So yeah, once you get used to it, it actually makes your grip feel, well, even more solid. But again, with sharp metal corners, that could also be painful under impact. But to give you an example, I actually train with this Marauder a lot in the reverse grip, locked in, edge facing towards me, combined with, yeah, this is actually one of my favorite combinations because that grip does feel so secure. Yes, a lot of that is the Cray X, but there is something that sub-hilt is doing that it probably wasn't designed to do, but I figured out how to make it work. Yeah, so that combination is really, really working for me in, well, all grips. I've learned to work with it, around it. I guess the bottom line of this discussion is it worth learning to work with or work around? And I guess it's up to you. And in that equation, I will have to go back to that function 5 of the sub-hilt is, yeah, they make the knife look cool, so maybe it just appeals to you visually, and that attracts you to it. I would have to say that the look of a lot of the edged weapons in my collection is indeed what initially drew me to them, and then I found out later whether I actually like them or not, whether they're actually functional for me or not. But yes, attraction starts with the eyes. All right, I hope this has been a useful discussion. And there may be more discussions like this. Let's start by getting our conversation going. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, how did I do? Was this clear? Was it useful? Were my tests terrible? Should I do other tests? Let me know if you want to see more videos like this, or regarding specific knives, or yes, we've already talked about, and you have requested I start talking about weapons combinations like these, so I'm going to try to get that content coming. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, liking, subscribing, following my journey. putting up with my madness. And I hope to see you back for, well, we're probably going to get back to Blade Runner.